Most people fail at learning new skills not because they lack talent, but because they're making one specific mistake that almost guarantees it. I've spent years studying how people actually acquire skills, not just theories about learning, but what happens when real humans try to master something they don't yet understand. And what I found changed how I think about the entire learning process. That mistake is called theory overload. It's when you consume too much new information at once, and your brain simply can't process it into actual skill. The ironic part is this: the fastest way to learn is usually to learn more slowly. If that sounds backwards, keep watching, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly why this happens, what it costs you, and the specific formula that flips it. If you've ever hit a plateau where you felt stuck despite putting in effort, this is for you. The mechanism here is actually simple once you see it, but almost nobody notices it happening. Let me start with how learning actually works at a mechanical level. Every time you acquire a new skill, whether it's writing code, playing guitar, or running a business, your brain goes through the same four-step cycle. You have an experience. You observe what actually happened. You think about what needs to change. Then, you run an experiment to test your new approach. Without this cycle, you cannot learn anything. This is foundational. Think of it like archery for a moment. You draw the bow with your hands, your stance, your breath. You aim at the target with intention. You release the arrow. Once it leaves your fingers, you have zero control over where it goes. The arrow's path was determined entirely by everything you did before letting go. So you watch where it lands. You notice the deviation from the center. You think about what caused that deviation. Maybe your grip was loose. Maybe your stance was off. Then you adjust and try again. That's the feedback loop. That's how every single skill gets refined. Now here's where most people get stuck. Your brain has finite resources. Think of it like a computer's RAM or memory. Your cognitive capacity is limited. Every new piece of information you try to hold in your mind consumes some of that capacity. Every new movement pattern you're trying to coordinate uses up mental energy. Every new rule you're trying to remember takes a slot. When you're learning a skill for the first time, that cognitive demand is especially high. You're learning more slowly. Most people miss this completely. When you're starting a cognitive skill, and I mean skills that require mental effort, not just physical movement, your brain is working extremely hard. Learning to code isn't just about memorizing syntax. It's about holding multiple concepts in mind simultaneously. Learning to write persuasively isn't just about grammar. It's about tracking audience assumptions, emotional currents, logical flow, and voice. Learning to negotiate isn't just about tactics. It's about reading the room, tracking your own emotions, and adapting on the fly. Each of these carries a high cognitive load right from the beginning. Physical skills are different in one important way. With a physical skill, your muscles burn energy, but your brain's cognitive resources aren't as overwhelmed early on. With a cognitive skill, your brain is what's exhausted. So when someone tries to learn a cognitive skill, they're already operating close to their mental ceiling. This is where theory overload happens. Imagine a student named Suresh who decides to take an online course in software design. He's excited and motivated, so he blasts through the material at maximum speed. In 5 weeks, he covers about 31% of the course. He watches video after video, takes notes, reads documentation. By the metrics of content consumed, he looks like he's winning. But when he takes the practical exam, he scores 80%. When he takes it again 3 months later, his score drops to 71%. He kept forgetting what he learned because he never actually embedded it into habit. Now imagine another student, Enzo, taking the same course. Enzo doesn't try to rush. He takes a full year to cover 20% of the material. He moves deliberately. He doesn't just watch videos. He actually builds projects, makes mistakes, debugs them, reflects on what went wrong. He's doing roughly 15 to 20 hours of practice for every 1 hour of new theory he takes in. Suresh was doing more like 1 hour of practice for every 3 hours of theory. When Enzo takes the same practical exam, he starts from a baseline of 62%. By his latest attempt, he's at 92%. Here's the twist. Despite covering significantly less course material, Enzo actually learned more. He learned more because he wasn't overloading his cognitive system. He was giving his brain enough space to turn theory into habit and habit into automatic skill. This is the real cost of theory overload. When you pile too much new information into your learning schedule, you might feel like you're making progress in the moment. You're checking boxes, crossing off modules, consuming content, but you're not actually wiring the skill into your brain's long-term system. You're not building the neural pathways that make performance automatic. You're stuck in a perpetual beginner state, restarting from zero every time from zero. Every time. Some people spend months or even years in this trap, feeling like learning is impossible when really they're just cycling through information too quickly. The reason this matters so much is what happens over time. Consumption speed times cognitive overload frequency equals total learning cost. If you're overloading once per week for a year, that's 52 cognitive crashes. Results vary based on your recovery time and mental resilience, but the cumulative effect is real. Now let's talk about how to actually fix this. The solution isn't complicated, but it requires patience, which is where most people break. The ratio you're aiming for is roughly 5 hours of practice for every 1 hour of new theory. That's the baseline starting point. But it's not a rigid rule, it's a starting estimate. What matters more is actually monitoring how quickly you're forming stable habits. When a new skill stops feeling mentally exhausting and starts feeling almost automatic, that's when your brain has freed up cognitive resources. That's when you can safely add more new information. The cycle looks like this. You learn one new technique carefully. You practice it repeatedly until it stops requiring conscious attention. Your brain optimizes its neural pathway, and suddenly you're not burning mental energy on it anymore. That freed up energy is where your next layer of learning lives. This is what separates people who learn consistently from people who learn in bursts and plateaus. Most people miss this. The people who accelerate their skill development aren't the ones working harder. They're the ones working on the right timing. They're not fighting their brain's actual capacity. They're respecting it. They're learning to distinguish between the feeling of productive struggle and the feeling of cognitive overload. Productive struggle is when you're challenging yourself but still managing the load. You're making mistakes, debugging them, adjusting, trying again. Cognitive overload is when you're drowning in new information and can't even see what to adjust. One builds skill, the other just builds frustration. Let me give you 5 concrete examples of how this plays out across different domains. A software developer learning a new programming language faces high cognitive load because she's not just memorizing syntax, she's learning new paradigms and architectural thinking. If she tries to absorb the entire language in 2 weeks, she'll cover a lot of surface area but retain almost nothing. If she picks one core concept, say object-oriented patterns, and practices it for 2 weeks, building real projects, debugging them, and reflecting on what went wrong, she's actually developing transferable skill. Results vary based on prior programming experience, but the principle holds. A salesperson learning consultative selling faces high cognitive load because he's now tracking his own emotional state, reading client signals, adapting his approach in real time, and managing objections with sophistication. If he takes a 3-day intensive workshop and tries to implement everything immediately, he'll feel overwhelmed and revert to his old patterns. If he focuses on one new element, say asking better discovery questions, and practices it for 2 weeks on real client calls, getting feedback, adjusting, his brain actually adapts. Results vary by client complexity and his natural questioning aptitude. A musician learning jazz improvisation faces high cognitive load because she's not just playing notes, she's learning harmonic relationships, listening to other musicians, responding in real time, and managing multiple melodic ideas simultaneously. If she tries to learn bebop vocabulary, chord substitution, and transcription technique all at once, her brain overloads and she ends up frustrated. If she focuses on learning to hear and play one specific melodic concept for a month, just really owning it, playing it in every key, exploring its variations, then adds the next layer, she actually develops intuitive understanding. Results vary by her foundational harmonic knowledge and listening history. A real estate investor learning commercial property analysis faces high cognitive load because she's now tracking cap rates, expense ratios, financing options, market cycles, and negotiation leverage simultaneously. If she tries to evaluate complex commercial deals after reading one book about commercial real estate, she'll make expensive mistakes. If she analyzes one simple deal type, say small apartment buildings in her local market, and does it repeatedly for 3 months, understanding what drives value, what mistakes to avoid, she builds real judgment. Results vary by her access to deal flow and mentorship. A hardware manufacturer learning lean manufacturing faces high cognitive load because he's not just learning tools, he's learning systems, thinking, waste elimination, team dynamics, and process optimization across his entire operation. If he tries to implement 5 lean projects at once, nothing sticks and he gets frustrated. If he focuses on one bottleneck process, maps it thoroughly, optimizes it with his team over 6 weeks, celebrates the win, then repeats with the next process, his organization actually changes. Results vary by his team's baseline operational maturity and internal change readiness. All of these stories follow the same pattern. The people who actually learned were the ones who narrowed their focus, went deep, and only added new information once their brain had absorbed the previous layer. This is why trying to consume information faster doesn't work, no matter how motivated you are. Your brain doesn't care about your calendar. It cares about how much information it can actually process into neural pattern, and that processing takes time. Here's the calculation most people get wrong. Hours of theory consumed divided by hours of practice actually done equals your actual learning rate. If you consume 10 hours of theory but only did 2 hours of practice, your learning rate is inefficient, even if you feel busy. Results vary by the type of skill and your prior knowledge, but the ratio matters more than the hours. The fix isn't to work more hours, it's to redistribute your hours. The people who look like they're moving slowly are often the ones who are actually learning the fastest. They're not slow, they're efficient. Now let's talk about what happens once you actually do form a habit. Your brain's relationship to that skill changes completely. In the beginning, checking your email requires attention and conscious effort. You're thinking about each step. Open app, navigate, read, compose, send. After you've done it 1,000 times, you barely think about it anymore. Your brain has automated it. Same thing happens with learning. In the first weeks of learning guitar, playing a simple chord change feels impossible. Your fingers don't know where to go. Your timing is off. Your pressure is wrong. Your brain is burning massive cognitive resources just to coordinate basic movements. After months of intentional practice, that chord change is automatic. You can play it without thinking, which means your brain has freed up the resources it was using to monitor it. That freed up space is where you can add the next complexity. This is the actual mechanism of skill progression. It's not about willpower or talent. It's about managing your cognitive budget deliberately. This is where it gets real. Most online courses and learning programs are designed around content delivery, not around your brain's actual capacity. They move at a fixed pace regardless of whether you're actually forming habits. They measure progress in modules completed, not in stable skills acquired. So the student who finishes the course fastest gets celebrated, even though she probably retained almost nothing. Meanwhile, the student who finishes slowly, who spent real time on each section, who actually built projects and debugged them, she's the one who actually learned. But nobody celebrates her because she looks slower. The system is backwards. Your job is to recognize that and work against the system's incentive. You need to be the person who prioritizes habit formation over content consumption. You need to be willing to move slowly and be okay with it. And you need to monitor your own cognitive load as the real metric. Here's a practical checklist for how to recognize if you're falling into theory overload in real time. If you're finishing learning sessions and can't remember what you learned, that's a signal. If you're taking lots of notes but rarely reviewing them or using them, that's a signal. If you're feeling frustrated and overwhelmed most of the time instead of excited and challenged, that's a signal. If you keep restarting the same material because you forgot it, that's a signal. If you're learning a ton of information but not getting better at the actual skill, that's the biggest signal. When you notice these, the fix is to reduce input, not increase it. Cut the amount of new material you're consuming in half. Then actually practice what you're learning until it feels stable. It will feel slower. That's the point. A lot of people ask whether this applies to all skills equally, or if some types of learning can move faster. The honest answer is it depends on complexity and your prior knowledge. If you're learning something that builds on foundational knowledge you already have, you can move faster because you're not burning as much cognitive energy on basic concepts. If you're learning something in a completely new domain, you have to slow down because everything is new, but the principle is the same. You're constrained by how quickly your brain can actually form stable patterns, not by how much willpower you have. Willpower isn't the lever here. Cognitive capacity is. Once you accept that constraint, everything else becomes clearer. You stop trying to force learning and start designing your learning to work with your brain's actual mechanics. And that's when things change. That's when people who struggled with learning for years suddenly find that they're acquiring skills much faster than they ever have, not because they worked harder, but because they worked smarter about how they spent their cognitive resources. This is why the conventional wisdom about learning is so often wrong. Practice makes perfect is backwards. It should be deliberate practice on the right thing in the right amount, make skill. Learn while you sleep might have some mild benefit, but it's a rounding error compared to actually doing focused practice while awake. More hours equals more learning is the exact trap we've been talking about. The real insight is simpler. Learning is constrained by your brain's ability to form stable neural patterns, not by how many hours you pile on. And that process takes time and has a natural rhythm. You can force it. You can only respect it. Most people never figure this out. They spend years wondering why learning feels hard, why they keep forgetting things, why they can't seem to progress on skills they want to develop. And the answer the whole time was that they were asking their brain to process too much information too quickly. They were trying to force learning instead of designing for it. Here are 3 things to take away from this. First, theory overload is the silent killer of skill development. Second, slow, deliberate practice beats rushed content consumption every single time. Third, your actual constraint is cognitive capacity, not available hours. The system you use to learn matters more than how hard you try. Once you see this, you can unsee it. The question isn't whether you're capable of learning. You definitely are. The question is whether you're learning in a way that actually builds skill or just in a way that makes you feel busy. If you want to explore this deeper and see how to apply it to your specific skill, there are frameworks and templates that can help you design your learning calendar around your actual cognitive capacity, rather than just falling into whatever pace feels normal. Start by identifying one skill you're working on right now, and honestly assess whether you're moving too fast. You'll probably find you are. Then cut your new input in half and see what happens to your retention and actual performance. That experiment is worth more than any theory I can tell you.